Okay, I'll kick this thing off. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. You and Mighty tonight, but that's all good. I'll apologize. First and foremost, we were going to meet and we canceled, and then I had a vacation day that landed where we were going to be, and it just took a little bit to get it back on my calendar. So you've had a little bit of a summer break after 2 on meetings, but here we are. I do think this is still a lot of important efforts to go through. Hopefully everybody had a little bit of time to go through some of the material in the packet. And then also we've got a kind of more interactive map with the zoning that we'll talk about a little bit tonight as well, and how that relates to some of the code changes that we're looking at. But first and foremost, let's just do a roll call. Let's just do around the room introductions again. Whitney, you want to start?
Sure. I'm Whitney Smart. Yeah, long time Philomath resident. So yeah, that's kind of my interest in joining the committee.
I'm Stuart Pritchard. I'm a short-time Philomath resident. Retired, moved here. We're doing it.
I'm Christopher McMorrin. I am also, I guess, a pretty long time Philomath resident, and I'm on the city council, where we've talked a lot about housing and economic development. So I was happy to be able to be here too.
Ms. Workman, city manager. We've been here for 10, almost 11 years now.
Matt Lehman, I'm also on the city council. I've been in Philomath for 20 years now, I think.
Rookie numbers.
I don't know. People still like, who's the new guy?
I'm Janelle LaJoy. I've been here about 6 years, I think. Bountiful Backyard, Philomath Farmers Market, those things. And I am not on the city council.
Carly, you want to say hi, and then Spencer?
Yeah, sure. Carly Johansson. Hopefully my dog doesn't bark. I don't have Zoom dampening on right now, but he's busy, so hopefully not. I've lived in Philomath for just over 2 years now. I'm from a small community, just like Philomath, back in Iowa, and I just really love the community, and I wanted to be a part of it.
I'm Spencer Irwin, committee member on this committee and been on several other committees. And I've 15 years, I think, or something. I've lived in Philomath.
Sweet. And I guess we should say, fair to say, Spencer is running for city council and Christopher is running for mayor. So, and Matt Lehman's on council and not up for re-election for another couple of years. So he's on base.
Yes, he's the real winner.
He's on base. Awesome. All right. Well, first up here, we talked about this last time we met, was election of committee chair, co-chair, and a scribe. The chair responsibility is really going to just be to do kind of what I did: introduce, welcome everybody, work with me a little bit on helping set the agenda, topics for the agenda. Not a real heavy lift. More than anything, it's just be conducting the meetings, make sure everybody has a chance to participate. When you are chairing, you'll notice people kind of do like, I kind of have something, but I kind of don't. So, you can give them an opportunity to speak if they're a little bit more shy, and if someone else is dominating the discussion, you can point out, it's like, we've heard a lot from you tonight. Let's hear from other points of view. But anyway, being the chair on the committee, we just had an inclusivity committee meeting, and we talked about the chairs there. And I liked one of the comments that was said was, this is kind of a safe space to be a chair of a committee, because it's not like, what was the term they used? It's not, nothing overly consequential, I guess, that happens. It's kind of advisory for the most part. So for anybody who's not chaired a committee before, this is a good kind of first opportunity. But we're happy to have anybody do that. So The way that we'll handle this is if you'd like to volunteer to be the committee chair, we'll kind of set it for the year. So we'll maybe say finish off this year and go through 2025. So if you'd like to be the chair for a year, you can volunteer. Or if we don't get a volunteer, then you can nominate somebody else to be the chair. And just be warned, if you nominate somebody else, you will likely get nominated as well. That's the way it typically works. So we'll do chair, and then we'll do co-chair. Again, co-chair would just help run the meeting if the chair is not available on a given month. And then it would be nice to get a scribe. We do pretty minimal minutes. We do what are called action minutes, so you don't have to write down every word that everybody says. It's being recorded, it's on YouTube, we have a transcript that you can get through YouTube, and so these are really just action minutes. Here's what we talked about, this was a motion that was made, and the vote, and when you just get that recorded, what time we started, what time we ended, who was in attendance. So the scribe portion of it is pretty minimal as well, but again, it's a good opportunity just to do a little bit more. It helps me pay a little bit more attention in the meetings, so I don't mind doing it, but again, it's a good opportunity for somebody else that wants to be a scribe. So let's do them in that order. So we'll start with election of a committee chair. Does anybody like to volunteer or nominate somebody to chair the committee?
I think one other thing that I wanted to bring up, we have 9 people missing.
You do.
Should we put this off until we have more people here? I mean, there's what, 4 or 5 of us that aren't on the city council and 9 people that.
Yeah, which actually was what I was going to start with and forgot when we were doing that is we don't have a quorum, so we won't be making any decisions tonight. So, yes, good point of order. Very well put. So we will put this off until we've got the quorum. The rest of the agenda is just review and discussion. We're not going to be making decisions. So I'm happy to go through that, or because we don't have a quorum, we don't need to have an official meeting and we can just punt and try to reschedule for another day. I'm
I
happy.
have one question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like official, just a question. Why doesn't it mention ADUs anywhere in any of the language in the codes?
I saw accessory dwellings.
Accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah, exactly, sorry.
So
No, yeah, they're on
allowed-
there.
Yeah, they're allowed. They're just in a different section of the code. So this isn't obviously all of the residential code. This code is focused primarily on 3 different types of residential districts and what's allowed in each of them.
Okay.
And then it's kind of the first page or 2 of some of the language that we're getting rid of to get rid of flag lots and some other things that have been problematic in the past. But there's a lot more residential code, and there's a whole other section of residential code that deals with accessory dwelling units and where they're allowed.
Okay, I guess I just didn't see it in the table.
Yeah.
Like setbacks and
So
things.
by state law, accessory dwelling units are allowed in any residential district that allows for single unit residential homes.
Oh.
So a single unit home, single family home, whether it's in R1 or R2, if it's single family, then you can have an accessory dwelling unit by state law. So they're allowed. If you have a duplex and you want to add an ADU, then it depends on how much your total square footage of your lot is, because an ADU is considered a 3rd dwelling unit. So as long as you have the square footage for 3 dwelling units, then you can add it, but otherwise you don't have the capacity for it.
But any single unit family, single unit home, calling it now, I
Yeah.
guess, can have.
An ADU. You still have to meet some setback requirements. We're actually looking at those setback requirements right now. In a backyard, you've got to have 15-foot backyard setback for your primary residence. We're looking to drop that down to 10 feet for the ADU, so you'd still have to have a little bit of a decent-sized backyard to fit one in there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing either, but we don't want an ADU built right on the backyard fence line either,
Yeah.
right? So, but we're thinking of dropping that down to 10 feet. You'd still have 5 foot on the side yards, 10-foot backyard. If you went 2 stories, then it would bump back up to the 15 foot again, just so you're not right on top of your neighbor's backyard. But
So an ADU is an additional dwelling unit, is that?
Yeah.
Accessory dwelling unit, yeah, so it's accessory to the primary structure. So there was some state law passed a few years ago to encourage construction of ADUs. The nice part of the ADU is you're using the primary home's existing water and sewer lines. So you're not doing a separated water and sewer line. It's attached to the primary, so you have a pretty minimal impact on infrastructure for the city. We don't require additional parking. There's, you're really getting an extra dwelling unit without a lot of public infrastructure costs. And for the property owner, you just have the cost of building the structure, but again, you don't have additional cost of hooking into the city's water and sewer and street and everything else. So right now, our 5 system development charges we charge for any single residence that comes in is about $30,000 for water, sewer, street, storm, and parks. All added up is about $30,000. So if you're doing an ADU, that's $30,000 you don't have to spend to hook into existing system because you're such as attaching into the primary structures already existing attachments. So it's a good option for some infill development.
And affordable dwelling.
A little more affordable. They tend to be a little smaller.
Yeah. So how do, if someone in some of these structures that have are maybe older and have structures that don't fit the setbacks, can they turn them into ADUs, grandfathered in because the structure was already there?
Yeah, so depends. Our code doesn't really address ADUs really any different than just an additional dwelling unit, other than when it's attached to a single family primary structure already.
Already, gotcha.
You've got an existing primary structure and you're looking to add one. ADUs can be detached, they can be attached, so you can do an attached ADU, detached ADU. An attached ADU is really no different than just an addition to your house. It's just gonna have a separate entrance and it's gonna have its own kitchenette is the big difference. So you can have your own kitchen, your own bathroom, which typically in a single family or single unit residential, the state building code, and there's exceptions, but state building code only allows for 1 kitchen per dwelling unit. If you're gonna add a second kitchen, they consider it a second dwelling unit. So
That makes sense.
it's a little nitpicky and in the weeds a little.
And a shower too, right? Or some,
You have to have a living space, sleeping space, kitchen, and a bathroom, right? State building code, yeah.
I can put a bathroom in my garage theoretically, and it's just a bathroom in my garage, but if I put a shower or something in there, then they're like, oh, someone lives there.
Yeah.
That's the other side of it, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there interest in having a quick meeting and going through some of these? It sounds like there's some questions.
I'm just, the only thing, I'm just kind of wondering if we can get an idea of what's happening. We're reading in the paper that Interfor's been bought. We heard rumor about grocery store. Anything that you can talk about that's happening out there?
Yeah. Interfor's been bought. Little inside baseball there. I can tell you that Brad Fuqua with Philomath News interviewed the new owners yesterday morning. So I would expect an article out shortly, probably this week.
I read one today.
Did you today that came out by him?
Yeah.
Okay. Did he name the new owner in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they said they're gonna be making the pressure reduce the wood.
Yeah.
And then they're gonna build a plant here, they think they'll.
Yeah, so Timber Lab is the company. They're a very large company. They've done some recent expansion into Portland. Oh, thanks. We lost Spencer and he came back. If you go to the Timber Lab website, they've actually got a page that talks about their expansion into the Willamette Valley, and they talk about a facility that they plan to purchase, and it's 100,000 cubic board feet per year, and at full expansion up to 100 jobs, and so that's on their website. My question was, is that us? It's kind of like what's the book, the Never-Ending Story, where the kid's reading the book, and he's like, is it me? Are they talking about me? that's kind of what it felt like reading their website. It's like, is this the Philomath, is this the site here in Philomath? And I haven't read the article yet, but my assumption is that, yeah, this is the Willamette Valley site that they're referencing in that webpage. But it sounds like our initial conversation with them, they're still, at least a year out or so before they're going to be actually in town and do anything with the properties.
You mentioned something about starting to build the fabrication plant.
Okay.
And it'll take about 2 years to build it.
Okay.
But picking up with the other things sounded good.
I need to read the article, but yeah, so that's big. Grocery store, we've got a lead on a grocery store chain, which is exciting. We've had other leads in the past and they haven't amounted to, any results, but, we take all of them seriously. We're excited for each of them. And so we've got a meeting set up for the first part of October. Big picture, so that's that. So nothing's developed. There's an ongoing effort to try to attract a grocery store to Philomath, and that's been going on for 11 years since Ray's, shut down, since the parent company filed for bankruptcy, and they shut down 7 stores in Oregon, Washington area, and so we were one of those that shut down, and we've been trying to get a grocery store ever since. So that's a backstory. Currently, one of the things that we're doing to try to attract a grocery store is we're looking at our zoning, so that'll kind of segue into the part that'll be interesting. Yeah, as you were looking at the zoning map there, if I had a grocery store owner come into my office today and said, we'd love to build a grocery store in town, where should we build? We're pretty limited on where I can point them to in town that's a large enough commercially zoned piece of property that they could build on. So we are looking to do some rezoning. And part of the rezoning is going to be converting some of the industrial land that's on the north side of Highway 20 on the east end of town to take that first 500 feet and rezone that to commercial use instead of industrial use. They're fairly large properties in there, and so it would be, the thought being behind there that a larger, big box, a grocery store, consumer outlet of some sort could go into that space easier than what we've got in like our downtown or even on the west end of town. So some of that zoning is being proposed. It still needs to get through planning commission. It still needs to go through a public hearing process. We've talked to several of the property owners out there, but not all of them yet. So we want to make sure that they're aware and hopefully on board with the concept as well. Ones we've talked to so far are very favorable towards it. So I don't anticipate any issues there, but then it needs to go through city council and get approved still. So time frame wise, we're looking to try to wrap that up by the end of the year, at the very latest come January, February, to get it passed and into ordinance form and actually get the maps amended. So that's one of the changes we're looking at for zoning. The other things we're looking at, do you mind if I share a screen and I can talk zoning map a little bit? Toggle some. I've got to move a couple things around so I can see.
Is he back?
Well, this is the current zoning. You can see, let me take one more thing off. So here's current zoning. This is the spot I was just talking about here. This is all zoned industrial park. So this would be kind of like Sunset industrial, kind of just east of the Safeway complex there. So you go out and then Research Way, and you go down there. That's kind of an industrial park. So it's a nice wide street, big landscape buffer, and then your big, large industrial buildings, but they're not like heavy industrial machinery. It's just big, large or industrial spaces, lighter industrial type uses. That's the current designation for industrial park. And so that's what we have zoned for those areas. The dark purple is the heavy industrial. So you can see up at the current sorting yard, this is the new Timber Lab site, the old Interfor site is all of this. This is where the RV park is going, that's been approved. This is the self-storage down here. And this part up in here is gonna be like outdoor boat and RV storage through this area. There's a couple buildings that have been built out here that are industrial use. The new zoning is identified by this black, darkened black squares. So you can see here, we're looking to shift from that industrial park to C3, which is a regional commercial space for larger regional commercial use. So kind of bigger box store use. That continues there, out to Landmark, and even to the other side of Landmark Drive, which flows up here. So that's that spot we just talked about. The other big change that this shows, and let me go back here, is if you look in this center area, the light blue is OR, which is office residential. People always think of residential because it ends in residential, but really it's office more. It's mixed use commercial zone. So office residential was intended to go up along College Street, which is where originally the couplet was going to go up College Street instead of down Applegate Street. So College was going to be Highway 2034 westbound. And so they zoned it office residential, so all those homes in there would get redeveloped into commercial storefronts with residential up above. So mixed use, commercial, residential. That didn't happen. The couplet came down to Applegate Street. College Street is a great little neighborhood street. It's got some nice homes on there, some older homes, some smaller homes, some new homes. It's a nice mix, and so that office residential is not really appropriate for College Street any longer. And so that is all gonna get rezoned to R2, which is our medium density residential. And so that shift you can see, if I toggle right there. So the slider R2, which is already kind of up above here, is just gonna drop down and take the place of a lot of that office residential that we have along College Street, both sides of the street on College. And then you'll see just below that, then you'll still have your commercial strip along the highway itself, you know, half a block north, and then either half a block or full block to the south. So that's going to be a major change. It's going to affect a lot of people's property. We've had people come and testify at the city council level that they have a house there. It's on a big lot. They'd like to divide the lot and put another house on their lot. They can't do it currently because the zoning's commercial, and if you divide your property, that new use has to be a commercial use. It could be commercial and residential, but you can't just put a house on it right now. You currently can't, if you've got a small house and you want to add an ADU, can't do it because single family residential is not allowed in the commercial zone, the OR. It's considered non-conforming, and you can't make it more non-conforming by adding another dwelling unit. So any house along College Street currently can't have an ADU. If we shift it to R2, now you can add an ADU, you can convert to a duplex, you could tear down a house and build a duplex or a triplex. It gives you a lot more options in that R2 zoning for residential use. Obviously, you lose that commercial area, right? But again, the vision for College Street isn't to be a future commercial district. It's really to stay that neighborhood use along there. So that one's going to be a big one. It's going to affect a lot of people. There's a lot of houses in there, and for the most part, it's going to be a net positive change for people. And you can see there's a little office residential down here. There's some down here as well that'll get converted to our general commercial. There's a little bit down here you saw, and it's going to shift as well to R2. This office residential here, this is the Oak Springs Apartments. Funny thing, in our code, apartment complexes, high density multifamily is allowed in the commercial districts and the office residential district. So even though it's office residential, we have high density housing. So we're gonna fix that, convert that to high density residential, which is the R3. And then we've also had some discussions with property owners up in here, and they'd like to look at some high-density residential as well. So you'll see that dark red come on, and we'll kind of have this little pocket there between 19th and 20th that would allow for some additional high-density housing up there. Again, with zoning, probably a good time to pause. With zoning, it's always about kind of setting the table. The city's not developing these lots. Existing uses will continue to be what they are. It's just new development that comes in that would have to then abide by the new zoning that got put over top of the property.
How's that affect our selection of our carbon-friendly spaces?
There's some impact, but the carbon-friendly areas that code language we're looking at is pretty similar to what we're doing in the high-density residential. It's going to be an overlay zone, so regardless of the zoning district, that climate-friendly and equitable area, everything within that area, regardless of what the underlying zone is, going to have to comply to those standards. And so it kind of doesn't matter where you put it; it's just going to be those standards. And where we've got it's going to be in some of this high-density residential, and then also this R1 and the commercial areas. So it's going to have impacts throughout, but those impacts aren't going to be a lot different than what we're already doing in our R3 or our commercial district, which also allows for commercial first floor and residential up above. Yeah.
Getting into the weeds a little bit, but.
Let's go.
So for that new pocket of R3 on North 20th, if I remember correctly, didn't we just also vacate the right of way on the north end of North 20th?
Yeah, this little bit up in here.
Yeah, so I guess just how would that at some point then need to be a connection to
19th?
19th? No?
I think it'll still come out.
Okay.
Out College and out
Okay.
19th that way. Yeah.
Okay, even if it's a bunch of high density.
Yeah, I mean, this strip of College fronts the apartment complex that's
Right,
already there. There's a few residences here, but you can see the future zoning for that is commercial, not
Yeah.
residential. So use-wise, won't have a big impact. But again, it's at the time of development, that's when you're gonna look at
yeah, okay.
what are the impacts on traffic and how do you mitigate that, and are the streets, sufficient and everything else. But I don't envision the county being, or the city really being that excited about reconnecting 20th Street there again and that curve. Just take it around.
And then the city-owned lot is, I can't remember if it's to the east or the west of 20th Street.
It's just to the west, so it's right here.
Okay.
So it'll stay current zoning.
You can do multifamily in the C2 zone.
The new zoning that we're proposing is partnered with new development code, right? And so they're gonna come hand in hand and be reviewed and approved at the same time. The new development code requires that, or allows for residential development in any of the C1 or C2, which is our downtown commercial or general commercial, will allow you to put residential units there, but it has to be upstairs or back behind. Actually, let me take it back. Our current code says upstairs or back behind. The new code will say it's gotta be on that second level. In the commercial area, even when the housing market's hot, we don't wanna lose all of our commercial space, especially in that downtown corridor, to residential development just because we have a hot housing market. Because eventually the housing market's gonna cool, and where the business owner's gonna go if there's no spot along the highway. And so in order to preserve that commercial feel along the highway and in that downtown core, the first floor has to remain commercial, but then you could build, a unit apartments or 2 stories or 3 stories up above that. So that would be allowed in the C1 or the C2. We're not allowing any housing development in the C3, the regional commercial. We want to preserve that for the bigger grocery stores, the bigger stores. They take parking space, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want to fill those up with multifamily housing in a hot housing market and then not have a spot for a grocery store to go 10 years from now or 5 years from now. So that's office residential. again, it's just gonna go away. So right now we have C1, which is our downtown core. I'll focus on that here next, but we have the C1, the C2, and office residential. We have 3 commercial zones. We're gonna go down to just 3 as well, but it's gonna be the C1, C2, and then we're adding, so we're getting rid of the office residential and we're adding the R3, the regional commercial. So we'll still have the 3 different zones, but a little bit different flavor. The office residential is kind of blending into the C1, C2, which allows for the multifamily anyway.
Can you pull up the 2024 one? I was just curious if there was any discussion on that weird little like R3 butting up right against R1 south of 20th.
This one?
Yeah, is there any discussion of moving that R1 to R2? It feels kind of weird to go straight from R1 to R2.
I think it's the apartment complex currently.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I think that's fine, but just it feels like that R1 right next to it could be an R2 or something, just to kind of have it step up to R3.
well, and it's developed to its single family homes in there now, and they're fairly newer homes on that side. So, there's a couple of cautions on the planning side when you're looking at these zoning changes. One is you want to be somewhat reflective of what's on the ground already. We don't have just a grid of streets and we're doing Sim City and just determine where everything is going to go, right? Like the city is already here.
Right.
And so some of it, we want to definitely reflect the neighborhoods and the commercial districts and the things that are already on the ground.
Right.
So that's first and foremost. And then second, we want to be careful not to do spot zoning, which is where you're saying, this property is going to be high density and this property is that, and you're really trying to look more like regional, like this area is going to be our high density residential area. This area along the highway is going to be for our commercial districts. This area just on the outside town is going to be for our larger, bigger stores. And you try to look at it not on a property by property basis, but look for the kind of those zones, right, or districts that are a little bit larger than just a property. With apartment complexes, it's a little bit tricky because you don't necessarily want an entire region full of high density residential, right? You kind of want those kind of spread out throughout your transportation corridors. But this one I think is more just a reflection of what's on the ground more than anything else. Yeah. On all of these, I will say part of this process of bringing this in front of the public is going to be, I mentioned the Planning Commission is going to be hosting a tent at the farmers market this Sunday. The city's one.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So we'll be there with the map and they'll be there to talk, and a lot of getting the information out is to hear from individual property owners, but also just residents in general about what they think about the zone changes. But if there's an individual property that somebody has an issue with a zone change, we want to know what the issue is and why it's an issue. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the zoning plan will change, but it might, right? So the residents do have input into this planning process. We don't pretend that we know everything about every property in the city. There's going to be things that you as a property owner know that we don't know that would be good for us to know as we're kind of finalizing this. We did identify, this is R2, it's R1 now. This is the rodeo grounds, is going to get converted to public space because it's city owned now. We did identify some area for some higher density housing in this area here, which I think is currently low density residential. Again, as we're looking for, pockets and areas of town, walking distance to your downtown, walking distance to your transit services, to the bus stops. Where can we put some higher density housing? Because we know, as much as people may not want to live right next to apartment complexes, we know that we need apartment complexes. The rents tend to be lower, you can get more people in those spaces. So the Planning Commission spent quite a bit of time looking at the map and trying to identify areas where we can have that high density residential that wasn't going to have negative impact on transportation routes, mostly transportation routes, when they're looking at those considerations. If it's close to a park, that's a good thing. It's close to shopping, close to the bus, those are all bonuses, right? I'll make note of this big R3 out here. We were looking originally to rezone that to the industrial, but when Inter4 went up for sale, we just kept it as R3, which is what it is now. With Timber Lab purchasing that property, they may come in with a zone change request, or we may reach out to them as we're doing this public outreach process, we might talk to them. And if they plan to store equipment there or store supplies or stuff there, we may go ahead and just recognize that this is owned by an industrial manufacturer, and that's what they're gonna use the property for. Let's go ahead and just get it changed now, so that we're not assuming we're gonna have a large plot for high-density residential where there's not really gonna be one. So again, trying to be reflective of what's actually happening on the ground as much as we can.
Is that in the floodplain, that phase?
It is. Well, everything
Yeah,
from about here
Right.
south is in the floodplain, including where we're sitting right here.
yeah.
So, yeah, everything sits down in the floodplain.
Cause if there's a flood, you don't really need City Hall or the police department.
No. Let me talk about C1 just real quick. You can see right now, City Hall downtown is our C1 is the dark blue. It's 2 blocks between 14th and 12th. And it goes a half a block north of the highway and a half a block south of the highway. So that's our C1. We're proposing that we enlarge that. Let me zoom in just a little bit. So not a whole lot, but at least giving another, half block up to include another half block down, and then coming over a block. This is the church, and this is the museum. Rezoning those doesn't really do a whole lot, but we could definitely expand, get at least another block to the west, another half block north and south. The C1, part of the development code that's being written, C1 really focuses more on being pedestrian centric. So we don't allow things like drive-through restaurants, drive-through banks, car washes, car dealerships, things that are typically allowed in the C2, the general commercial, and we want those types of things. You don't typically want your walkable downtown area, right? That C1 is really meant to be, you're gonna, think of Corvallis, right? You're gonna get out, you're gonna park. You're not gonna park right in front of the store you wanna go to, because that spot's never open. You're gonna park, and you're gonna get out, and you're gonna walk a half a block to get to where you wanna go. You're gonna stop somewhere else on the way. You're gonna make a few stops, enjoy the downtown area, and then you're gonna make your way back to your vehicle and you're gonna leave. So everything in that C1 we want to be more pedestrian focused, right? It's not real heavy need to have to be in your car to go stop to stop to stop. Once you get out of that downtown commercial, then you're gonna allow for more of those vehicle friendly commercial uses, having your parking lots, your drive-throughs, those types of uses. So that's really the big difference in the C1 to the C2.
So which one is the lot the city owns?
14th, and
So the half block.
is right here.
Yeah.
Yep, so it'll be C1.
I was just curious about that, cause it does a C1 drive-in / through facility.
Disallowed, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Good catch, yeah. Yeah, that C1 is gonna be more pedestrian centric and less vehicle centric. I've talked a lot commercial. I haven't talked a whole lot industrial. I'll just hit it real quick. Right now we've got 3: heavy industrial, light industrial, and industrial park. Again, heavy industrial, we don't necessarily have noise constraints. We don't have smell constraints. We don't have vibration constraints. We don't have lighting constraints. I mean, it's an industrial spot, right? And it's for manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, all those types of things. So everything from rendering plants to log sorting yards to mills, right? So all that's going to be allowed in the heavy industrial. The light industrial is going to be light manufacturing, so assembly of parts, machine shops, whatnot. I will note along between Applegate and Main Street, you'll see currently there's a number of light industrial, it's this brown. Even off of Applegate in between the couplet. We've got those spots right here directly next to City Hall. And so we've looked at those spots, and the proposal is to rezone those to commercial uses with just a general C2 and keep the light industrial kind of down here at the side where it tends to be existing. And then out here outside of town a little bit more. And then of course up off of Industrial Way. So
Will that impact any of those businesses along that couplet? Like, I know that there are, some auto shops and things like that along that road that I would imagine are in the light industrial areas.
yeah, some are, some aren't. Any current use would be able to remain, and that would stay there, even if ownership changes. So if it's a car lot and they want to sell and a new car lot wants to come in, they would be allowed, they'd be grandfathered in. We call it a non-conforming use, but it's allowed because it was there before the zoning changed, right? So that would continue until it doesn't, right? So if, say that, well, auto shops are allowed in the commercial as well. But just for sake of argument, if you had a machine shop that was allowed in light industrial but not allowed in the commercial, if you sold and somebody came in and wanted to put a retail shop there, now it's commercial, that industrial previous use is gone, you couldn't convert back to that previous industrial use. So it won't have a negative impact on existing owners or existing businesses, but it will hopefully influence the future uses, right? We want those future uses to conform to the zoning. Yeah, good
If
question.
the landowner is not excited about the proposed zoning change, what's recourse do they have?
They can come and testify in the public hearing and state why, and then it'll be up to the planning commission and the city council to feel like if they feel like there's justification to leave the zoning, then they would leave the zoning. And similarly, you may have property owners that say, I want rezoned, like we just talked about Timber Lab. They may say, we'd like to rezone that R3 to heavy industrial or light industrial. Can you include that with the blanket zone change so we don't have to come in and do it later? It costs about $3,000 for zone change just for the application, let alone what you're going to pay all your professional consultants and everything on top of that. So if we can wrap it up as part of our blanket zone changes, then we're happy to do that where it makes sense.
Does the timber company have to come and testify for a change? I'm just curious, residents do,
Yeah,
or business owners.
Yeah.
They're a business owner too.
yeah, and they would.
Or anyone could submit written testimony too.
Yep.
I'm just,
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah. You want the CEO in person.
yeah, right?
We'll get a letter. So, all right, well, let's talk a little bit of residential, and we won't spend a lot of time here, but our residential is kind of threefold, and I'm gonna reference this chart that was in the packet. 18.3550 residential district standards. Look a little bit bigger on my screen. I apologize for that, but the city currently has and will continue to have 3 different residential districts, R1, R2, R3. R1 is our low-density residential, and as shown in the table there, it's going to allow for a single unit, just be a single house, or duplexes. There's new state law, not that new, but relatively new state law, says in any zoning that allows for any lot that allows for a single unit home has to allow for a duplex as well. And so it used to be that our R1, our current code says in the R1, you can only do single unit unless you're a corner lot, and you can be a duplex as long as you're at least 10,000 square foot in size. So it has to be a corner lot and it has to be a substantial size. A typical residential lot right now, minimum square footage is 7,000. So most, if you think of like just subdivisions in Philomath, most homes on properties are between 7,000 to 10,000 square foot. That's the size of the lot. And so, for that corner lot to be 10,000 square foot and be on the corner, then you could put the duplex on there. That change with state law said, nope, we want more density, so any place you can put a house, you have to be able to put a duplex as well. But you can see in the table, we've still got some, you just have to have the square footage, you have to have a little bit more space than you do just a residential. The planning commission is looking at dropping that minimum square footage down from 7,000 square feet to 5,000 square feet. Again, that's just a density issue. A contractor or developer could build larger. Right now, the standard is that you can build up to 150% of the minimum, or your maximum could be 150% of your minimum. We're gonna change that and double that in the R1 so that you could still build up to a 10,000 square foot lot if you wanted one. If you wanted a subdivision with all 10,000 square foot lots, so everybody's got big yards, a developer could still put that in, right? If they want to put in bigger houses, bigger yards, the code's not going to take that ability away, but it's also going to allow a different developer to be able to put 5,000 square foot lots in with, you know, a little bit smaller home, you know, just different setup, I guess, was what I would say. For reference, the houses along 15th Street that just went in, or even along 16th Street off of Chapel Drive, on the south end, those are right at 5,000 square foot lots, and that developer is building 22 to 2,500 square foot homes on those lots. And so it's not necessarily a smaller house, it's just they tend to be narrow and deep, and so it's just a different configuration than like the traditional rancher that you kind of think of. 70s, 80s. So that's our R1. We're again looking at allowing for some higher density. It's still single unit residential, but instead of a 7,000 square foot lot, you could go down to a 5,000 square foot lot. The other note I'll make on that is currently to build a single unit residential in the R3, that's currently at 5,000. So right now it's R1, R2, R3, 7,000 square foot minimum, 6,000 square foot minimum for R2, 5,000 square foot minimum for the R3. So any place that's zoned R3 in the city right now, 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, which is why, again, going back to our toggle, when the Mill Pond Crossing development came in, they requested R3 zoning because they wanted to get down to that 5,000 square foot lot so they could get more houses in there. But we did a development agreement with them originally that said, we'll let you go down to 5,000 square foot lot, but everything has to be single unit. We don't want duplexes, triplexes, multifamily, which is what the R3 would typically allow for, right? So we gave them the higher density, but didn't allow the multi-unit development to go in. So that will change. So when we look to rezone this, again, you'll see this is going to be converted to R2 and some R1. R1's existing right now, 5,000 square foot lot size. And then the new undeveloped portion of that will go to the R2, which I'll talk about here in just a half second. So that R3 is really going to be targeted at a multi-density residential. So apartment complexes, townhomes, where that high density is. From a planning standpoint, if it's zoned high density, we want to make sure that we've got the high density there, because if it's zoned high density, we're going to put in larger water lines, larger sewer lines, wider roadways, more pedestrian access ways. And if we're going to put all that infrastructure into the prep for the high density, we don't want somebody to come in and say, oh, I'm just going to build a bunch of 5,000 square foot lots with a bunch of houses on it. We don't get the density that we were planning for. So we're really trying to be strategic about where is the high density going to be so we can plan for it with infrastructure. And then we want to make sure that we get it by having a minimum, skipping R2 right now to the R3, minimum 24 units per acre, which is about what the Boulevard apartments and the Oak Springs apartments are right now. I might say about, I think they're actually both a little bit more than that. So it's going to be an apartment complex, 3 stories tall, or it's going to be a townhouse development of some sort, maybe stacked, maybe side by side. But it's gonna be high density, shared parking lot, and that's what you're gonna have to do in order to get that higher density in the R3.
So where you have the cursor right now, that R3, is that area right now that is just,
The field right now.
it has,
It's got the big,
has the stacks of dirt in it and the concrete pad.
Everyone's favorite part of town. Everyone's favorite
Yeah,
part of town, yeah.
yeah, this is the, so 15th Street had the first row of houses came in here. And then 16th Street, it's what's built now, and it's got, most of the houses on this side are done, and they're constructing the houses on this side of the road.
I know where we are now.
Yep, that's part of phase 2B, and then this will be phase 3 and phase 4, and he's not submitted final plans for that yet.
So the little R3 in the corner, because I remember we rezoned that recently from
This
an
one?
application. Yeah, so then that would get zoned back down to R2? Just because I know that was like a specific
It's
landowner.
for sale right now, so we're gonna
Okay.
see what the new landowner's intending to do there. We had an approved plan for 4 triplexes on that lot. 4 triplexes would fit on that lot within our R2 right now.
Okay.
If they wanted to do like 5 plexes, well, then they probably wanna keep their R3. If they were doing 4-plex, they could keep the R2. So we're kinda gonna see what the owner wants, cause it could go either way. If they want a pocket of R3 for higher density, it's on 19th and Chapel, there's great traffic, transportation connection there. It's closest to the schools, it's not great on the bus route, but you know, you're not gonna get everything on everyone, but if it wanted to stay R3, I don't know that I would fight it necessarily, but it'd be again up to the planning commission, city council. But right now, we've got it slated as, I think, as staying. I don't know, it turned, it's off colored, but still says R3, so I'm not sure.
Those are 3.
Yeah, I was confused by that.
We'll check on that one.
Okay.
And are the R3 spots, are you kind of making sure that they're close to like the bus lines and stuff? Because that would be potentially where people who aren't driving are.
Yeah, so I mean, there's some here, this is like the parking area for the rodeo is up in
Okay.
here. So here's 13th Street. So here's the library, this is 11th Street, here's the library.
Stop there.
So, you know, those are pretty close. This is mostly existing, but you know, you're just a block or a block and a half from Main Street, which has the stops on it. And then out here, there'll be a bus stop here, and the RV park goes in, they're required to put a bus stop up here. And there's already an existing bus stop right here. Actually, that one I think just got a new bus shelter installed today in front of Oak Springs. So they just got a very nice new bus stop down here.
Does that mean the bus is gonna like completely, they're gonna like come in on West Hills?
It comes in this way from the highway. So
Yeah, I mean, but if they're for the RV park, are they gonna have
no, it'll go up and it'll come all the way up to Forest Meadows.
Oh, wow, okay.
And they've got room in here. When they redesigned, we made sure that they had room for the bus to come in, pull in front of their mailboxes, and then back out. So it'll just make that loop. So we'll have an added stop up at Forest Meadows.
Nice.
So we'll hit the RV park, Forest Meadows, and then they'll come all the way back down to Main Street and go west.
Okay.
R1, talked R1, talked R3. The R3 says apartment condominiums. I think we're gonna add townhouses on there as well. We ran the numbers. You can fit the townhouses there if that's the look you're going for and still getting the density. The key is it's the 24 units per acre. And if you can do that with townhouses, cause they're stacked, I don't care what you call them, right? So we'll probably add that in there though. I had a developer that said, what about stacked townhouses? I'm like, okay, looks like an apartment complex, right? So, yeah. So let's talk R2 a little bit. I'm excited about the R2. This is that middle housing that we're hearing so much about in the news. It's not subsidized, affordable housing where the government's coming in and building it and renting it out for cheap. But it's that middle area where you know, people need housing so they can afford to buy it. And so the new R2, you can see the different lot sizes can allow for single unit, duplex, triplex, manufactured home parks, as long as you don't see a lot, actually got a minimum 10 acres for manufactured home parks, so you won't have like little pockets of manufactured home parks. It'd have to be something substantial, 10 acres, or sorry, excuse me, 2 acres or more for manufactured home park. Cottage clusters, which will be new, that's new to our code. And then townhouses, which were allowed before, but this townhouse language and provisions are gonna make it a lot more doable. So you're talking 1,500 square foot for a townhouse because it's gonna be sandwiched. We're actually looking at dropping that down for your middle units, down as low as to like 1,200 square feet for a center unit, because that still gets you a 12 by 54 or 60 foot. That gets you right at 1,000 square foot, which you can sell on the market now probably about $300,000. So that's going to be like a very affordable, you buy it, you own it townhome. But we've got to get it down to that 1,200 square foot footprint, make that happen. So we probably look at 12 on the interiors and keep the 15 for your end caps, your first and your last in that row of townhomes. And I think we capped it at 10, no more than like 10 in a row, so you won't have like, you know, 30 of these things lined up. You'd do a set of 10 and then another set of 10, and you'd have some spaces between for some green space and yard and whatnot. So those are exciting. Cottage clusters, if you haven't seen those, you can Google search them. There's a lot of room for cottage clusters. If even on the lots up off of College Street, if it's even just a little bit bigger lot, or even if not, the code still doesn't allow for a tiny home unless it's in the RV park. A tiny home, by definition, is still on the axle, so it's mobile. So the only place those are allowed is going to be in the RV park. But a pre-manufactured home that's just built off-site, or maybe it comes in on an axle and then gets put on a foundation, becomes a cottage. So you can do a cottage cluster where you have shared parking area, and the biggest thing on the cottage cluster is you have a shared yard. And so not every single yard, kind of even like a manufactured home park, typically every manufactured home still has like their area, right? Like this is my space number, and it includes my front, my side, and my backyard. On a cottage cluster, typically what you'll see is houses that are surrounding a central area that's a shared front yard, could be a garden area, could be a landscaped area, a hardscaped area, could really vary.
A bountiful front yard.
Yeah, bountiful front. But it would allow for, you could get 4, 5, even 6 cottages around a central landscaped area, where otherwise you can only fit maybe one house or maybe a duplex, and instead you provide housing availability for 5 or 6. And each of them could own their individual cottage. They could also be centrally owned and rented out, but you could sell those cottages individually and have some type of a land trust that owns the property that everybody buys into for your monthly maintenance fees or whatever. It could be an HOA. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to set it up, but the beauty of it is that it allows for, again, ownership, where you can come in and you can buy a 600 square foot cottage that you own that's going to appreciate in value over time. And you're not buying the land, you're not having to pay for your parking space, you're not having to pay all this other expense. You're just buying that smaller house that you can get in and dwell and not just be paying rent.
Well,
You can dwell there.
Well, when you're dwelling.
So cottage clusters, I think will be cool. I think we'll see more of them, especially on these little infill sites where they're not big enough to do a whole lot else with, and you could do a duplex or triplex, or you could do 5 cottages, right? So I think we'll see a little bit more of that in this infill area that's coming in. The big shake on the R2 is going to be up on North 12th Street between 12th and 13th. Right now, that's all zoned for R3, which is mostly taking advantage of the 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, because we see several smaller lots up there. And they've been divided and divided again and divided again into these smaller 5,000 square foot lots. But we're not seeing multifamily up there, right? We're not seeing large apartment complexes, anything like that. And so that'll get shifted to the R2, which is gonna, again, hopefully be more reflective of what's there and also fuel the ability to do more of this middle housing development type along that area. So that'll be, again, that'll affect a lot of people as far as number of residents, but as far as the current uses of the property, it's just gonna allow, again, we're not getting a lot of requests from people who live there that say they want to put an apartment complex in, right? So mostly they can already, in the R3, they can already do duplexes and complexes. One thing the code does add, which isn't in here, would be a fourplex. State code, when they look at middle housing, they include fourplexes in the middle housing. And so we would add that into the R2. We need to add it into this table. So duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, or quads, manufactured home, cottage cluster, and townhomes. So you get a lot more variety. So again, we're trying not to change too much the characteristics of an R1. It's still gonna feel like suburbia. It's still gonna have the ability to have a front yard and a backyard and your white picket fence and, you know, kind of more traditional suburban house on its own property. Could be down to 5,000 square foot lot, so that could still happen. You could see a lot narrower lots like what we've seen on 15th and 16th Street. So, you know, it could change the look and the feel there a little bit, but it doesn't have to. We're gonna focus on the R3 property for high density residential, and then this R2 is that middle housing that's just gonna allow a lot more flexibility and a lot more variety for the property owners. And depending on what you're gonna do, you're gonna have different setbacks and, you know, different densities are gonna be allowed and required and everything else. So that's kind of the spiel. The text that was in here updates setbacks a little bit. Again, we remove some of the, mostly just setbacks. We remove accessibility structures a little bit. We are working on some better design standards for streets. Give you one quick example. I feel like we're reaching the end. Do you have questions? Right now, if you want to get access, you want to build 4 houses on a lot, or on 4 lots. If you want to build 4 houses, you can build 4 houses and you only have to put in a 20-foot wide fire lane. So paved asphalt, 20-foot wide, a length so that the fire truck can get to all 4 houses. If you add a 5th house, you go from a 20-foot wide requirement to a 36-foot wide full city street with sidewalks on both sides and a 4-foot landscape strip back behind that. So you go up to 56 feet, I think it is, wide. Just for adding 1 more house. And we look around and we wonder why we're not getting infill development in these areas, right? And that's a lot of it. So we're looking now, there's some room within our design standards that the Public Works Director can approve narrower than that 36 feet. We're looking at one potential future development where we're at 28 feet, which allows your fire lane plus parking on one side of the road. One side of the road would have to be signed for no parking, but it does allow you the 20-foot fire lane, 2 10-foot driving lanes, plus 8-foot shoulder for parking on. And that would be up to however many houses. The development that future development we're looking at, I think has 10 or 12 houses on it. And the question I posed to the Public Works Director is, how many houses is too many, or what length of, you know, road is that become now? It feels more like a local street than a shared access to these houses. What is that number? And similarly with the 20-foot fire lane, I think 4 is too little. What is that number? Is it 4? Is it 8? Is it 10? Once you get to 12, now we want to go from 20-foot wide to 28. But I think that there's a continuum there that we're not really doing right now. We're just doing this big stair step, right? You go 20-foot or 36. I think there's a couple steps in between there. And the reason that's a big deal is if you can narrow your street down, you've just allowed more square footage to go towards lots instead of street frontage that nobody's driving on most of the day, right? So if we get the streets down so that the fire department's safe or the fire district is comfortable and it's safe, then why have any wider street than what you really need to have just to get access to a very small number of homes? That's not a major thoroughfare, right? We're not talking 19th Street or 9th Street. These aren't thoroughfares that are connecting neighborhoods. This is a pocket area that's going just to those residences that are living on that street. So there's other things we're doing outside of just the code language to try to not just get more density, but really it's about making homes and development more affordable. The more affordable we can make housing, the more likely it is that people can buy a house and build equity rather than having a bunch of investors from Portland come down and buy housing and rent it out to everybody, and we all just become tenants, you know, and just have to pay rent to everybody. So that really is the big goal, is to try to encourage home ownership, owner occupancy, and building equity. So that's kind of the pitch. Question?
Yeah, the off-street parking, I know that the state basically says you can't require off-street parking.
Yep.
And so I assume we're removing that from the code.
Yeah, the code will say it's not required, but if you're providing it, here's the standards. So we'll still have standards for parking,
That's what I want to make sure. Yeah.
but we can't require it. Yeah, the new state law, if you're within a half a mile of a transit stop, and you can't require on-site parking. That's residential, commercial, industrial, etc.
There's not many places in Philomath that are more than half a mile.
No, we essentially made the determination it's just gonna be citywide. I'm not gonna draw a line.
Not a lot of places in Philomath that are half a mile from anything.
No.
The people that are half a mile away have so much property that you can park 86 trucks and tractors, so it doesn't really make a difference.
Yeah, it'll just be a blanket across, but we will still have design standards for parking lots. Any other questions?
Somewhat totally unrelated.
Yeah.
Are we not burying the power?
On Main Street,
Yeah.
it was $2 million.
I knew I remembered something about streetscape committee, and I'm just like,
$2 million just to bury the lines, and that was like an initial estimate, not
like
counting.
years ago too.
Yeah, and that was not counting every time you go to an older building and you go to convert
Oh,
them.
you got a retro,
They have
yeah.
to do their entire panel. If they're doing their panel, typically you're rewiring the entire building. So that gets very expensive very quick with existing buildings. So the 2 million was like to convert the lines, and then you add on another
Good.
million plus just to convert everything. So it was an expense that got cut out of the project pretty early on. I mean, we initially had it in there, but yeah, it was too expensive.
I heard a couple, I was at, Dizzy Hannon, a couple from Eugene was complimenting the new light posts.
Yeah, they look nice.
Bike racks
I
look
said, they're
lovely.
wood, I said, we live in Philomath, they gotta be wood or you get hung.
I'm glad other people feel the same way.
No, it's looking great.
But in our design standards, like new development does not have overhead electricity, right?
No, any new development has to be underground.
Okay.
And
That's how it looked around town, but I wasn't sure if that was written down
Yeah.
anywhere. Okay.
we make exceptions if you're the one vacant lot and everybody around you has overhead power.
Okay.
Then we'll allow you to put in overhead power as well, because it's so much more expensive to take the overhead power from your neighbor and go underground. So we make exceptions if there's existing overhead around
Okay.
you, but any new subdivision, new business, whatever, it's gonna be underground, yeah.
Yeah, I agree though. It would have been cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it looked very lovely. Or
We did some initial outreach to like Pioneer and Xfinity and stuff, see if they would put their low hanging wires, the lower
Oh,
ones
yeah.
down, at least underground those, but again, it was like very cost prohibitive for them to do that even, so a few lines got buried, but not as many as I was hoping would, so. The power lines themselves sit up pretty high, I mean, you almost really don't see them. but-
maybe eventually we can just level out the power poles. I mean,
Written more.
the new
Conductive charging.
lights
for-
are beautiful, straight, then you've got
Yeah.
power poles, they're like,
I know. Some of them are a little wonky.
all right.
Generally speaking, do you like the direction that we're headed? Are there concerns about the higher densities that you're seeing?
I think that's very necessary.
Yeah.
I think about my son who works, in the Seattle schools, and he can't afford to live in Seattle. We bought a condo and just rented it to him for $1,000 a month because otherwise he'd have moved out. He's in 800 square feet, and that becomes affordable as opposed to having to pay for even a 1,600 square foot house.
I have a friend who's looking to move to Bend who said that apartment rent is the same in Bend as it is in Corvallis. So, I mean, it's everywhere that it's kind of a struggle when you think about the size of Corvallis versus Bend. So, I'm excited to see some of this come in for sure.
Yeah, and of course, the goal is, one of my goals is home ownership, but I recognize there'll be investors that are going to be building these and renting these out as well. And I'm okay with that because we need the rentals as well, right? I didn't buy a house when I first got married. I rented for a while. When I first moved out of the house, I rented. I didn't have the money for a down payment, but the rent was low enough that I could afford to put money aside every year to be able to eventually buy a place. But right now, with, again, rent so high, I'll say that we have seen the rental market have some cost controls on it with the 2 large apartment complexes that came into town, because there's always turnover there, right? Before, there were so few apartments in town that the prices were sky high, and they could charge it because nobody was vacating. Every month you see 2 or 3 hit the market. Now with the Boulevard Apartments and Oak Springs apartments, they have several people moving out every month. And so they're continually marketing their product, which means everybody else has to match where they're at, either at their rate or below their rate, depending on if they feel like they're a nicer apartment complex than the brand new apartments that just went in that have a swimming pool and a fitness center and all these other amenities. If you don't have those amenities, then you can't charge quite as much. And so it kind of helps with some price stabilization. Not that prices still haven't gone up, but I think just having more on the market helps the consumers. Dwellers.
Or dwellers.
Dwellers.
Okay, well, I won't keep everybody any longer. Thanks for letting me kind of go through it. If you have other comments or you think of other things, I will email a link to the map. This is a city GIS map, and you can go through and toggle and play with it. If you have other thoughts or concerns, call me, email me. I'm happy to take the input. If there's specific properties like your house you're concerned about, definitely let me know. But time frame wise, like I said, we're going to start the public outreach on Sunday, reaching out to individual property owners. We'll have a public hearing. I don't have it right in front of me. It'll be in the next email that goes out to the community. But I think we're looking at like October and November for public hearings with the planning commission, and then eventually into the city council, maybe December, maybe January. But it'll be with, by the end of the year, first part of next year, that there'll be quite a buzz about this. And a lot of people may not care. Most people it's not going to have an impact on, but there's enough that it may have an impact on. And the goal is, again, that there's a net positive for the community. So.
And just to confirm, in the C1, we are allowing residential on the 2nd and 3rd floors?
Yep, C1 and C2 allows for residential on 2nd floor and above, just not the 1st floor. In the climate-friendly area, we have to allow it in the 1st floor, just within the climate-friendly area. Climate-friendly area is an initiative brought on by the governor and Department of Land Conservation Development. We have to identify a 25-acre area that has some additional development criteria, or some reduced development criteria, if you will, to focus on housing and pedestrian-friendly housing development. And so we've identified an area, and within that area, the underlying zone's not going to matter. There's things that we can and can't allow. And so one of those things, as we just referenced, would be we have to allow for residential on the 1st floor within that climate-friendly area. We can't, that was the original no parking, on-site parking requirements was originally there, and then it got expanded. And there's some other provisions that are in place for that climate-friendly area. The other caveat is government subsidized affordable housing can also go on the first floor, regardless of the underlying zone. Which I don't care for, but
And I'm not saying that we should do this a ton all at once right now. I know what I've heard is we can't do more than 3 stories for fire stuff, right? Like they can't, they don't have a ladder. It's above 3 stories. Is that a real thing?
I don't know that for certain.
Okay.
There's, yeah, well, we need to get input from our code within the climate friendly area. Our code says we can't have a minimum less than 50 feet. So we can't
Okay.
say you can only be 40 feet tall.
Okay.
We can only say you can't be more than 50 feet tall. But that doesn't mean that we've got fire apparatus and the ability to fight a fire. And so the fire code may kick in and say you can't be more than 40 feet tall.
Okay.
Because we don't have a fire truck that can go that tall. But I don't really know how that works because there's
Neither
like
do I.
20-story buildings in
Right,
Portland,
right.
and they don't have 20-story ladder trucks. So
Right.
I'm not really
Probably
sure
just
where that
more
line
like-
is.
Where they have to have like beefier stairwells and fire exits
Yeah.
and stuff. Yeah.
Like every apartment has to have a sprinkler. God, can you imagine having a sprinkler in your apartment?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
I mean, or I'm assuming like if a developer really wanted to build, they could like buy a new fire truck or something and then.
Pay for all the training on how to use it.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, Chris, could you have someone with social media about you guys being there? Just, hey, wanna talk to us about the rezoning that's happening and come and talk to your people that are gonna be making the choices, cause blah, blah, blah. I mean,
Exactly.
I've been wordsmithing all day, I am done. I'm done, I can't even believe I made it here.
Yep. I'll do that.
Alright,
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
then I can share it and